So, welcome to Finite State's webinar, Transparency in Action, a candid discussion on the good and evil of software bill of materials, or SBOMs. We will be sharing the recording after this event for all of those that have registered. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A portion of the webinar interface. And assuming we can get that populated, I will attempt to address those questions as we are moving on. And don't hesitate to reach out for some of those questions. I'll happily backtrack a little bit as part of our ongoing discussion throughout the webinar. So don't hesitate to ask that question if you think it might be a couple slides afterwards. I'm happy to go back and address some of those in line. Otherwise, we can see what we've got time for some time at the end and address those as well. But in the meantime, I wanted to invite you all to our webcast. Thank you very much for attending. We're going to have some fun today, and welcome to my disaster of a lab. You get to see the behind the scenes of some of the fun stuff that Larry gets to work on by observing all the junk, all the fun stuff in the background for some of the things that I'm working on as part of my role as director of research, product security research and analysis here at Finite State. All right, let's get to it a little bit here. All right, so a little bit about me, your quote illustrious host for this webcast. My name is Larry Pesce. I am the Product Security Research and Analysis Director here at Finite State, and I get to do all sorts of fun stuff to help make our product better for our customers and some of their various use cases, as well as do a whole bunch of fun research around how we can leverage SBOMs, how we can operationalize them, how we can make them better, what type of data we should be seeing out of them, as well as going and finding all sorts of fun stuff about hardware, as well as doing a whole bunch of pen testing as part of our services team. All right, so that said, I argue that I'm a reformed penetration tester. I spent nearly 20 years doing penetration testing in all sorts of environments and verticals and levels of criticality and so forth. And I think spending 20 years doing that has really tempered how I go and sort of approach some problems. So not only thinking about it from the pen test perspective, but also from a little bit of an adversarial type of scenario. So I think that's kind of where the theme of this webinar really stems from is my thoughts on uh, operationalizing the adversarial procedures of how we can use SBOMs, and then take that and turn that quote evil part for the adversarial posture into something good so that we can improve. As part of some of my ongoing interaction with the community, my good friend and I, Paul Asadorian, started a security podcast. We are in our 19th year. We're very quickly headed into 20 years of podcasting weekly. We are the Paul's Security Weekly podcast, and I co-host that with Paul every week that I am possibly available. Sometimes I don't get to host that because I am in the middle of teaching. I'm a principal instructor at the SANS Institute, as well as a courseware author. The authorship and my instruction is around wireless technologies, as well as the Internet of Things pen testing. You can start to see a little bit of a theme here. As well as not only am I an instructor, I also hold a number of SANS certifications as well. And little fun thing, my writing has improved drastically over the years, at least in my humble opinion. And as part of that writing improvement, and test reports and otherwise, is that I'm a relatively recent convert to the Oxford comma, because commas, they save lives, folks. They really do. All right. Hey, let's enough about me. Let's dig into um, some of this transparency around some of our software bill of materials. But to bring us back a little bit, um, the as part of delivering this, been asked a number of times to, hey, Larry, you shouldn't have that introduction. You shouldn't be having an introduction slide. We'll have other folks introduce you. But that introduction really didn't necessarily capture, the motivation behind some of these thoughts and some of the transparency for software bill of materials for the good and evil side. And again, that really comes back to my mentality as a pen tester. And by looking at something and how can we use what we've been given or what we can acquire to enhance our adversarial perspective. And that's really been some of the things that have, really helped shape my career is just looking at things critically and having that curiosity about how we can potentially manipulate something given the data that we've been provided. Uh, Early on in my career, that was exactly some of these types of things that I am applying to software bill of materials, looking at the good and evil side, about some other data that I discovered. Specifically, when Twitter was sharing, first started giving us the ability to share images. Twitter didn't have a service, it was a third party. And I started looking at some of these pictures. And this was right around the time that Apple started geotagging photos taken with your iPhone. And I was curious about what pictures were available out there being shared on social media that had this data. And specifically, ones that had this data, where can I track people's locations to? So thinking about the data that was being provided to me, maybe not by someone that was intending to it, and how could I use this in an adversarial scenario? What are some of the bad things that could happen about it? Ultimately, how can we defend ourselves against it? And this was lots of fun for this project. A good buddy of mine, Ben Jackson, and I started a website. We started scraping the public Twitter feed, and one of the inspirations for this was some pictures tweeted by Adam Savage. And based on the data that Adam had shared as part of these images, we were able to figure out where Adam Savage lived. And long story short for that one, we turned this into a big thing that we were tracking lots of folks on Twitter and publicizing that. But it really came down to there's data here. How do we choose to use it? And how do we choose to interpret it? And more importantly, how would someone else choose to interpret that for good or for evil? Ultimately, it turned into a good thing. People started to become more aware that they were potentially sharing sensitive location data, and that could cause them some potential harm. So put on the evil hat, but let's use that evil hat to turn some of our protections blue. Now, this is where in in my current day job and my current activities at Finite State, where software bill of materials really enter into this stuff. Software bill of materials is a huge amount of possible data on binaries and firmware and software, so that we can determine components that make up the software that we're delivering to our customers, whether that be through IoT, healthcare, industrial control systems, or otherwise. With that, we get a whole bunch of additional information. An SBOM by itself is just a list of components, but enhancing and adding to the software bill of materials really helps us build more knowledge around the devices themselves and the software that they contain. And specifically thinking about, um, if the device has a list of components, can we take that component and identify it uniquely through a CPE, and then tie those CPEs to specific CVEs or identified vulnerabilities? And then with those vulnerabilities, tie those to specific threats and or proof of concept exploit code and you name it. So we've got a list of that SBOM. of the components, enriching it to and tie that to specific components, to specific potential vulnerabilities, to even specific exploit code, um, with some threat intelligence becomes really important for this sort of understanding about the good and evil for SBOMs. Okay. This also is going to help us when we come down to having all of this enrichment as part of our software bill of materials. We need to sort of understand the difference between the first party code, the third party code, and the concept of shifting right and shifting left, excuse me, where we generate and utilize these SBOMs and their enrichment. In traditional manufacturing for hardware and software supply chain stuff, you're not writing all the software yourself. In many cases, you are reusing components from a manufacturer, maybe for a specific module, included in your device. Uh, Maybe some operating system that was not developed by you, maybe something open source, and those are the quote the third party stuff. You're then doing your first party stuff, the stuff that you're writing on top of all those layers to have your device do whatever specific thing that it needs to do, whether it's a camera or it's something that's controlling natural gas pipelines or something like you have a custom application, and that's your first party code. The first party code is the really easy part for you to gather the SBOMs on those. You can do those during development time. You can do those constantly with your shift left and over again and validate those components. The hard part is now having a cohesive SBOM for all of that stuff that you pulled in from your third parties as well. And that's where the shift right comes into. And that shift right is that software that you are delivering to your customer containing both first and third party code, stuff you developed and stuff other folks developed, and getting a whole landscape of everything within that software product. All right. And I think part of the thing that really grabs me about some of the software bill of materials is these are not things that are going to go away anytime soon. In fact, we're actually seeing the increase in demand for software bill of materials. Whether or not they're enriched is a completely different story. Specifically, when we start thinking about some government regulations and or initiatives. FDA's 524B for device certification that you're required to submit an SBOM as part of your application process to have your new medical device to be able to be used on humans and so forth. The Cyber Resiliency Act in the European market that your devices should be secured, and as part of that process, also requires software bill of materials. United States 2023 Omnibus Bill also includes a whole host of requirements for software bill of materials being provided to customers in various cases, also including the federal government. And then the U.S. voluntary program run by the FCC for the cyber trust mark intended for consumer IoT type devices so that the consumer can have a certain level of trust that the device that they are purchasing has some level of security, and they are also asking for software bill of materials. So we're going to see a lot more use, whether publicly or privately, of software bill of materials throughout the various ecosystems. And if we're going to start seeing more of them, maybe we should take a little bit closer look at some of the data that they contain. And that button doesn't work, but this one does. So software bill of materials, can these things be used for good? Yeah, absolutely. Software bill of materials are absolutely amazing for a couple of different perspectives. One, if you're receiving software bill of materials as part of something that you are using in your environment, you are the end consumer, regardless of your industry. It gives you an opportunity to potentially enrich some of these yourselves and or inspect the components that are being used in the product that you're putting in your environment. So it's an opportunity for this documentation to help you evaluate the security of your suppliers and arguably their software development lifecycle by determining the types of things that they're using. Okay. As a result, you can use that to start making some risk decisions about how potentially what devices you're going to choose to purchase, how you're going to implement them in your environment, and overall give you a better opportunity as a consumer to determine what your risk level is and how you choose to deal with those. Maybe you can observe that there's some specific types of features on these devices that you want to put on a more segregated network, that you're using a jump host to get to these devices for management and so forth, just based on the nature of the software components that are there. Also, um, thinking about the commitment to security for both your organizations as well as the commitment to security from your suppliers. How often are they issuing you new SBOMs because they've made software component changes? And whether that software component changes is due to new features or to responding to potentially security type of things. And on the converse, we'll sort of see this come down to, full circle about how actually device manufacturers can leverage these types of things to prove those commitments to security as well. But clearly, uh, my perspective is that these can absolutely be great things, and at the initial outset, these can be absolutely great things. But there's also some potential that we could use these for evil. And I've heard, the joke, and you can sort of see for yourself that some of my coworkers have said that this kind of looks like my evil underground lair a little bit. Maybe not so much on the red lights and stuff, but yeah, there's lots of stuff going on back back here. So very similar to some of the mess going on here with our AI generated art for our SBOMs for evil. And yeah, almost all of the art in this presentation has been generated through AI because I'm a fan. Again, a little bit looking like my desktop over here, and some might argue that there's some similarities here in the hairiness of our evil part. All right, so thinking about how we could use software bill of materials for evil. We're given a software bill of materials, and that's just a component list. It really comes down to the enrichment that we do by matching those components via CPE to specific vulnerabilities through CVE, and then enhancing those CVEs through some threat intelligence. Like that's potentially giving an attacker a roadmap for an individual device and an individual software version to have a roadmap for some attacks. They know what software components are in the product. They know that there are some potential vulnerabilities. They can now choose to go develop some more exploits for that, or with some threat intelligence, they may already know that there are some exploits available out there. And that's threat intelligence is really what makes software bill of materials truly have some potential for evil. Because of these software bill of materials are shared publicly, and we can talk about that shared publicly part. If you're able to get a software bill of materials, whether you're generating them on software that you are using in your end environment or the manufacturer is providing them, there's ways of doing all of that. That threat intelligence about tying those components to some potential exploits is really where the value is for evil. And that roadmap is really potentially giving an adversary through those components, through the enrichment, the ability to know something in an environment that is potentially vulnerable to some known exploits. Or maybe they've even, if we think about sort of even nation state level, they've got some exploits that are not public for specific components that are now identified in a whole host of products that may be on specific networks. And there's a pretty good indication that maybe these devices are vulnerable before those adversaries have sent a single packet because they've reviewed a whole bunch of data, done intelligence gathering, the threat intelligence gathering, and getting some software bill of materials to know the components. So that's where I think that some of the evil part of software bill of materials come in that we're potentially providing a list of vulnerabilities and even that threat intelligence links to code that we can go start exploiting these types of things for a device that we've never seen, we've never touched, we've never had to send a single packet on the network to do a network scan to see if the SSH service is listening, for example. All right, so for me, proof is in the pudding. Let's go and take a look at an actual couple case studies here. And there's a joke here, like AI generated art, like some of the prompt here was a weary traveler going into the wasteland carrying a case because it's a case study. See what I did there? Yeah, sorry, it's my humor. I get it. It's not for everybody. But let's go and take a look at a couple of case studies here, how we could leverage a software bill of materials to be evil. And then we'll sort of wrap that up with maybe improving some of that. All right, so our first case study here is against OpenWrt, a very popular open source firmware to replace firmware on many IoT type devices, and we'll dig into some of that. From the OpenWrt project, so OpenWrt is the framework to build an application without having to build a complete firmware around it. Effectively, here's an operating system now, a third-party operating system that you can now build your first-party code onto. And is incredibly popular in the hobbyist community for unlocking the power of some of your devices through open source firmware. Now, I want to be clear here. I have a long history with OpenWrt as a consumer and interacting with many of the folks on the project over the years. And I want to be clear that we're not picking on OpenWrt because they do things wrong. No, in fact, it's actually the opposite. They are very responsive to any noted vulnerabilities and are very thorough on their vulnerability resolution. The point here is that we're taking a focus on OpenWrt in this case study because they are very, very popular in the IoT space, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why. Okay. So in reality here, the power of open source and the third party, that not only can a consumer take, say, their home router and put OpenWrt on it, and get some new features. Maybe your router didn't support as a VPN endpoint, and then OpenWrt unlocks that for you because you can now customize and add new software and add new components to your device, and still have it function as said router. Okay, so unlocking additional feature sets of your device by providing this third-party software. However, OpenWrt can also be licensed, and my understanding for free, as long as you comply by their license terms, to be used for commercial purposes. What does this mean? This means that as a manufacturer of an IoT type device, you can go use OpenWrt as your base operating system. Yeah, think about that. You're now go taking an open source operating system and leveraging it under the hood for your third party stuff, and that um, we're dealing with all of those third party pieces as part of our development process that maybe we're not getting SBOMs for. So generating SBOM on the shift left or shift right portion for what we're actually delivering to customers is incredibly valuable through some additional binary analysis. And that's one of the places where I think Finite State really excels. In fact, I know we really excel at that. So OpenWrt can be found in all sorts of commercial purposes in commercial products. And well, you know, Larry, that's great, but it's for the hobbyist and it's for some of our little IoT stuff like your home router, and so forth. That's yeah, that's great, but Larry, we don't have like any of this low end consumer grade IoT type of stuff on my enterprise network. And one, because it is for some of the commercial purposes, can be used for commercial purposes. I challenge that a little bit. But more importantly, is that COVID really changed everything here. Um, In an in-person setting, I'd ask folks, "Hey, show of hands, how many people during COVID went to work from home?" Yeah, and also now, how many people are still working from home? And, for the most part, many of those still hands have either gone back up or the same. And Larry, why does this matter? Why does COVID matter when we start talking this case study? Well, if you think about your enterprise resources, such as your laptops and maybe some printers and a whole bunch of other stuff, during COVID, you sent those devices to people's home, to their work from home environment, placing it in their home on a network with all of their home control stuff and their personal router and their WebOS based TVs and all the other IoT type devices that they've got in their homes, from security cameras to door locks to refrigerators. And how many of those are running openware? Well, arguably we don't know, but there's a significantly higher likelihood now that your enterprise devices are in a significantly less controlled environment with so many more different network components that may have open word and may be subject to some vulnerabilities. Well, how do we figure that out? Well, let's go take a look at some of our software bill of materials. Yep. All right. It got a little flash here. And this comes down to some really interesting adages that my mom had always has told me as a kid, that uh, the cobbler's kids always have the worst shoes. And why is that? Like, why is the cobbler's kid? The cobbler is the guy that, or the person that fixes the shoes. Why are their kids always the ones with holes in them and the soles that are falling off and you name it? Well, arguably, the cobbler goes to work every day and fixes shoes. The last thing that that cobbler wants to do when they get home is go back to work and fix their shoes. No, they want to go do their hobbies. They want to spend time with their family. They want to go cook a nice meal. They want to relax. They don't want to have to keep fixing shoes now that they're home. So, unless the kids bring their shoes to the office, they're not going to get fixed because the cobbler's not going to take his work home with him, as it were. And I am an absolute prime example of this type of stuff. Um, my personal home network is probably not up to enterprise grade standards. Why? Because I do this stuff all day. And when I hang it up at the end of the day and I'm done with work, do you know what the last thing that I want to do is? Go pen test the devices on my network and spend time in front of a computer. Like, no, there's a whole world out there that has trees and grass and animals. Like I want to go see some of that. So, and like updating firmware to the new and latest release. Like, I am an absolute prime example of, I want to go look at my camera to see what package has been left on the front door. Or more importantly, I need to go to the camera so that I can yell at the kids in the backyard because I need them to come in for dinner or something of the like. And I go and I click on the camera and it says, "Hey, there's a firmware update available. Do you want to do it now?" Actually, no, I don't want to do it now. I need to use this camera right now. So cancel. I'll use the camera and then I promptly forget about it until the next time I go do that camera and it says, "Hey, there's a firmware update." And do you want to do the firmware update? No, because I actually need to use this camera right now. And if I do the firmware update, it's the same. Think about how many people are in the same boat, that you have deployed your enterprise gear into their work from home networks and have the same sort of things with their home networks and software updates and potential vulnerabilities in something like openware. If me, as a security professional who knows better, does those types of things, imagine how some of the folks in your organization who are not security professionals and are less security minded, the state of their networks and the state of their devices. So to me, that's kind of terrifying. All right, so let's go take a look at some of the data here. All right, so OpenWrt does not provide a software bill of materials directly, but they do have a GitHub, and they have a GitHub repo for OpenWrt, and you can get software build materials from that GitHub repository. Now, arguably a little bit, I cheated. I went and downloaded a bunch of firmware. I uploaded them to the Finite State platform, and I generated software build materials using our platform, using our binary analysis, our CPE and CVE matching, and our threat intelligence. Okay. So the analysis came out for one of the versions that I analyzed here, specifically like 1,563 findings. That seems a lot. Arguably, we're probably more concerned specifically with these 10 critical and the 38 high. Like, this is giving me a priority here too. Like, uh, this is also great when we start talking about using this for good, is that something like this can be used to go back to your teams to help them set the priority for things to resolve. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. All right, so let's start with the 10 critical and the 38 high findings here. And in that list, there were a couple that sort of reached out to me here, specifically around Lucy, specifically Lucy version 0.10.0, and that there were a bunch of CVEs tied to that from 2019, 2021, and 2023. All right. So on the high to critical side, some of these here for a component within the OpenWrt firmware. So this is the joke here, this slide title that I may need to explain to some of you that are a little bit on the younger side. The show I Love Lucy with Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. One of Desi's famous lines here was, "Lucy, you got some splaining to do." And well, the Lucy package is the web-based interface for managing OpenWrt. So Lucy, we've got some splaining to do here. Looking at this CVE from 2019 12272 for the Lucy web-based interface is a critical score here, base score of 9.8. So like I didn't need to send a single packet to this particular version of OpenWrt device to know that it's running Lucy 0.10.0, and that there are some potential vulnerabilities that are available over the network with low attack complexity. That's pretty terrifying. And are these types of devices in your network? Discussed that already. So now I thought about that and I'm like, well, where are these devices located on the planet? So I went and went to Shodan and had Shodan give me a list of devices that on their traditional web server ports would return the string of Lucy, LUCI, for identifying the web-based interface for OpenWrt. Now, 61,000 plus devices directly available on the internet all over the planet. This is just the ones that I can reach potentially via the internet that Shodan knows about. Now, here's one that is sort of critical about leveraging some of these for both good and evil. That with Shodan, I don't know what version of Lucy these are, but with my software bill of materials, I most certainly do for the devices in my environment. So Shodan's not telling me version, and it doesn't spit the version out that I have found remotely. You've actually got to go send some packets in these cases. So, um, yes, version not something we're going to get from scanning, but versioning something absolutely we could find from our software bill of materials. All right, so great. We've got some potential Lucy devices that are available. There's some known vulnerabilities, but that's great. There's some potential vulnerabilities, but can I actually go exploit some of these devices? And well, looking at CVE 2019 12227, and specifically our individual open-word firmware. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there that there's some stuff for proof of concept. There's some stuff that have been weaponized. There's even things out there specifically for the CVE that has been exploited by threat actors. And this is where the threat intelligence really comes in. And specifically looking at 2012, 2019, 12272, there is some proof of concept code out there for a little bit older version of OpenWrt. Now, the irony is that I found this not through the traditional threat intelligence, but I did some Googling for this, and this wasn't in some of the threat intelligence feeds that were being leveraged. So did report this back to some of the threat intelligence folks that are now adding these particular sources as part of their threat intelligence feeds. And Google Translate was really my friend here, um, because if there's proof of concept code and it looks like this, maybe we should be concerned. I don't know. But in any case, there were some proof of concept code out there for interacting with the devices. And again, proof is in the pudding. Can I do it? Does this proof of concept code work? Yeah. So I went and had that copy of the firmware. I stood it up in a virtual environment. Had that virtual environment connected to my own local network, and I tested the proof of concept code to interact with the Lucy web interface to see if I could do some exploits. And well, yeah, it looks like it worked. My Python script that is part of that proof of concept from the web page written in Chinese in the previous slide. I give it the username, and the username by default for OpenWrt is root, and we tell it what command we want to issue. And in this case, we did ls, and we got a directory listing, and we got we had it touch a file. So to create a new file in that directory, which looks like the web server home directory, and we do another directory listing, and sure enough, now the file is there. Okay. Now that's great as a proof of concept. The problem is like directory listing and touching some files, and that's not great, right? That's a great proof of concept. This is where I got to get nerdy with it, in that can I turn this into something that I could actually use to get access to the device? And absolutely. By using some underlying OpenWrt, Unix command line or Linux command line Kung Fu with make FIFO and the already installed binary of netcat, which was also in the software bill of materials, and some shell redirection and so forth, sending that command by executing the make FIFOs and netcat and so forth, and starting a netcat listener on my attacker system. Once that was run through the web interface, I was able to get a fully interactive shell back. Okay. And I was advised by one of my coworkers, and super awesome to be able to work with Q again. He immediately said, "Larry, that was cool. You probably could have just tried Pwn tools from Gallop Sled and would have not made any of your iterations with some of the shell redirection and all that type of stuff that hard. You probably could have done it a lot easier." And he's right. So you thanks for that. You know, sometimes we lose sight of the forest for the trees, and vice versa. So some more fun advice out there. So yeah, hey, look at that. Sure enough, yeah, they're vulnerable. Eh, We went from a software bill of materials for a device to actually executing an exploit on a device to have full control of that device. And well, to me, that's a win. And that's exactly how I envision our adversaries to do some of those types of things. All right, let's take a little bit deeper case study. And taking a look at that, let's go look at some other devices and not just some OpenWrt. Let's maybe make this a little bit more difficult on the enterprise side. Okay. In this case, we're going to look at an unnamed network appliance that is a VPN concentrator. Okay. We're not going to name and shame here. This is something that's been in the public fairly recently. You should be able to figure it out, and that's fine. The point here is that we're not about naming and shaming this particular vendor. It's about the methodology and the data and leveraging this type of scenario to help improve and or attack the devices. It's not about affecting stock prices by going and saying, this is horrible. It's not the case. That's not what we're looking here. But a fairly popular VPN concentrator from an unnamed network vendor um, that is arguably, in my opinion, an attractive target. Why? Because a VPN concentrator is there to provide remote access in a secure fashion to other deeper layers of networks. As an attacker, as an adversary, that is something that is incredibly valuable to me. I can only see your internet facing stuff, but if I can get on your VPN and if I can exploit your VPN, that VPN is connected to other networks that have potentially nice, juicy data that I want to get a hold of. And this particular one has been seen being exploited in the wild. Now, as part of the exploits in the wild, this one was being monitored by CISA. And specifically, CISA noted that as part of the exploit chain, the attackers were getting on the device and were living off the land. Yeah, that's where this imagery comes from. We're living off the land with our attacks. The attackers were not adding anything to this VPN concentrator to affect attacks on other networks and intercept traffic and do the attacks that they were doing because this device had a whole host of additional software running on the device or on the device as part of its software bill of materials with, in some cases, questionable need. So if I can now have an SBOM and have a device, I can now and know that it's vulnerable, I can now look at that SBOM and potentially see what other components are there that I can leverage as an adversary for living off of the land. So what does that look like? Well, some of the things here that were noted by CISA in this particular device that not only were there tools that are native to the appliances, such as free RDP and SSH and Telnet, but also that there were some libraries. Specifically, they noted Nmap libraries here, meaning that the capability for us to develop scripting with Nmap was there, even if maybe Nmap, the binary, wasn't there itself. So we could use these tools, but we could also use the development libraries left behind on this device and some potential questionable use on the device. Okay, so yeah, there were some binaries there that could be used, but the libraries were ones that were potentially more terrifying. Why are there some of these libraries left behind? Okay, so do some of these libraries and some of these binaries become a target in this case? And I'd argue yes. So we took one of these firmwares from this manufacturer. They provide some of these virtual machines available to do testing and so forth before purchase and so forth. So we were able to acquire one, with their quote blessing, downloaded from their website, and we're able to perform some of our binary analysis through that virtual machine images, and specifically looking at all of the libraries that were there and how they were potentially interconnected. I promise you, this is not more COVID. Okay. So in the center here, we've got a bunch of libraries potentially interconnected and are being used by a bunch of stuff. But there's a whole lot of these individual dots and or very limited stuff of libraries that are present on the system that we couldn't find other references to as part of their being used. So we question, is there a lot of cruft left behind on this particular device that would really enhance our adversaries to do some living off of the land? Specifically, I went back to look at some of my pen test experience and looking at some of the libraries that might have been interesting for me. Specifically, dpacket, Paramico, and libnmap were available. Now, the questions, are they really needed? Um, Maybe. So, and I don't have a deep understanding into the functionality of the device. Maybe Paramiko is there so that in this potential VPN appliance, you get a say you get a web-based interface, and it allows you to click on a button in the web-based interface, and it provides you an SSH session through the device to an internal host. And well, maybe that's where Paramiko is being used. Um, maybe Nmap, the Python lib Nmap stuff. Maybe I can see that there's a need for this as part of the device functionality. When you connect to the device, maybe there's the capability for the device to scan your system to see what ports are open and if there's potentially any vulnerabilities so that they can put you in a remediation zone that you need to fix these things before we'll allow you to connect to the full VPN. I mean, I can see that there's some reasonable stuff to that there. But then I start getting down to D-packet. And D-packet really brings up some questions. Oh, sorry. Really brings some questions for me. I mean, D-packet written by Doug Song is really old. And why do we need to do specific packet crafting and generation of various stuff on this particular device? I mean, I can see kind of nothing bad here. Okay. So I thought about this problem, about some of these things being left behind, specifically when we start talking some of these libraries. And I thought, well, Larry, libnmap is already there on the device. Um, what can you use this for? And well, I only know enough Python to be dangerous. So I went to ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT to leverage Python libnmap, specifically version 0.7.0 that was from our SBOM, to create me some scripts to do some scanning of, quote, internal networks from the VPN appliance so that I can now do some fingerprinting of the devices behind the VPN concentrator that I've already compromised. And that took about 30 seconds for me to come up with. The harder part was, hey, we've got Paramiko 214 libraries here. Can you write me some code using Paramiko to take advantage of a very recent open SSH vulnerability? Because Paramiko is already there. I don't want to upload my own code or my own binaries. Let's just put some code on the device and have it use those libraries to do that. And I spent more time trying to get around ChatGPT's ethics in developing vulnerabilities than I did actually getting some of the other code here. So yeah, that was the longest part of this whole thing, was trying to convince ChatGPT to write me some exploits, which I gave up after a while, uh, just because I had other things to move on to. Okay, but that doesn't mean a more determined adversary doesn't already have these types of code in their pockets. All right. So to start wrapping us up from some of these case studies and how we can leverage these software bill of materials for evil, I really want to kind of bring it full circle about using software bill of materials for evil. But let's choose our own adventure here. How can we really use the software bill of materials for evil? Well, I think, in my opinion, it is less about using a software bill of materials for evil. Uh, it really becomes about how we choose to use the data. It's how we choose to tell our story. We're given some data. We can choose to enhance it. We can then choose to enrich it. We can then choose to interpret that data. And it really comes down to about how we choose to do that. SBOMs are not going away. They are going to be required for so many devices that we're going to be starting to interact with. I have heard some figures, whether they're true or not, that by the end of 2025, every piece of computing hardware that you buy that has some connectivity is required to have an SBOM. Now, whether you get access to that SBOM is a completely different story, whether they're public or private. And I want to jump on that public-private bandwagon a little bit. I can see the question now that, Larry, well, as a result of using SBOMs for evil, should we make SBOMs private? And my answer is probably not, and maybe in some select cases, yes. For a number of reasons. One, if you make them private, someone's going to get one and it's going to get leaked, right? If you're having to give them to someone as part of your sales process or you name it, maybe someone's going to leak that unintentionally. Maybe they're going to leak it intentionally, or maybe you have them in a repository in your organization and your organization gets compromised and the adversary finds them and then takes them and releases them. Data is out there. Data wants to be free. So at some point it will be free. But also, you think about what I did with OpenWrt and with this unnamed VPN appliance. They had their firmware available for download, and I generated my own SBOMs. Yes, I used a finite state tool because it's awesome. There are other ways. Okay? There are many other tools that you can use. I'd argue ours is the best. Sorry, you came to a finite state webinar. You got to expect that, right? So they're not going away. And so sharing them privately, I think, is not going to be perfect because, maybe OpenWrt and the unnamed VPN appliance vendor has them and they only share them privately. But I generated them through other means, and our adversaries and our consumers are going to potentially be able to do this as well. Okay. The real value on those software bill of materials comes down to the enhancements, the CPEs, the CVEs, and that threat intelligence. So if you have SBOMs, go enrich them, go enhance them so that you can start evaluating the security of the devices and your risk portion. Also, as a vendor, start leveraging VEX. Yeah, hey, I've got an SBOM. It's been enriched, and it says that my version of software X is vulnerable to these, and there are exploits available. Yep, you're right. But if we go and look at what our code does, we in fact don't leverage those particular portions of those libraries that are considered vulnerable because we don't turn on or we don't have the availability to turn on SSH proxy or SSH forward agent and some of those types of things. So the vulnerable portions of the code is never reachable. So that's where sort of Vex comes in. It gives the manufacturer the ability to respond back, yep, we're using this component, but we are not vulnerable to these specific attacks as part of our enrichment because of these particular reasons. Great. Um, and arguably, well, let's use the opportunity of the software bill of materials and this enrichment to have some opportunity here. It's up to us to do the improvement, right? And I put this on the slide because I wanted to make sure that we are specifically addressing this. And I was going back and forth about I have to go back and look at my notes, and they're not always readily available. But not using software bill of materials as a manufacturer to improve your development lifecycle, you are generating a software bill of materials potentially on every build. Great, you've got them. Not using SBOMs to improve your security posture as part of someone that consumes devices and has software bill of materials for devices in your environment. Not leveraging those to figure out how you should change your security posture around those individual devices based on some of the enrichment. Okay. Not including SBOMs as part of pen test data gathering. This is the the ethical adversarial position. Use the methods that attackers are going to use. Use every piece of information that are available. As a pen tester, put your adversarial hat on in every one of these cases. If SBOMs are available and SBOMs can be enriched and SBOMs can tie us to potential vulnerabilities that we've demonstrated could potentially be dangerous, take that as these. If you're not using SBOMs in these fashions, these are huge missed opportunities for continuous improvement of the security of the devices, of the software that you are delivering to your customers. Okay. Yes, use your software bill of materials for evil. You do it too. So don't let the adversaries just use them for evil. You use it as well. Think like the attacker. And this is one of the things that has been, one of those things that I've seen all sorts of times throughout my career is that red informs blue. Your red team informs your blue team, meaning your in-house or third-party attackers, your pen testers, your adversaries, ultimately inform your defenders. Okay. So take your blue side, take your defenders, and have them put on their adversarial hats and leverage the data that is available to them, make them think like attackers. Take those things and apply it back to your defenses and even back to your software development lifecycle. So now your developers are saying, oh, well, we generated an SBOM, and that SBOM has that component. It's got these vulnerabilities. Maybe on our next rev, we should start thinking about that. Maybe we should address that with Vex so that by the time your software is going to release on release day, how many critical and high vulnerabilities are left in your product because you've integrated that as part of your development cycle? You provided that to your pen testers, and now they don't have a lot of things that they can also deal with. And giving your consumers a great opportunity, and as a consumer, to have a really great security posture because, yeah, hey, these things are going to change over time. So do it in an iterative fashion. So, yeah, doing all of these very much in an iterative fashion. My real grab here is that, yeah, we can be using these for evil. Our adversaries can absolutely be using them for evil with evil intent, but let's think like an attacker and use them to improve the security of our products and or how we do the security of our products. And I'm realizing now that I did forget to add a thank you slide at the end of this. And um, so we are right about to the end here. Um, all right. So I do have a question. As a manufacturer, are there certain SBOM fields, um, i.e. the component dependency graph, that are recommended to exclude in public XBOMs to reduce specific knowledge on exploitability? Ooh, all right. So that's a really great question. And thinking about the title of this webcast, the word transparency. Um, I think the intent of the SBOM is to give, in my opinion, an accurate list of the components used in the software. And if you start um, limiting what you're placing in the device, sorry, in your SBOM based on the software running on your device, you're in fact arguably not being transparent. And the question was worded, are there specific SBOMs fields that you shouldn't include? And I think that's also one of those that's kind of weird too, because the SBOMs have some very specific formats and that they do require specific fields. And quite honestly, I wouldn't eliminate any of those. But I wouldn't necessarily eliminate. I would also enhance. I would start leveraging Vex and VDR to have manufacturer responses to, yes, this is here, but we need to address these in specific fashion, or we've addressed these in specific fashions through these other methods, and or the code is not reachable, and so forth. Uh, so arguably, you really want accurate SBOMs because that is what other folks are going to build their risk decisions on. And before we run out of time here, to add some more to this question, think about Log4j. If I had SBOMs for every piece of software, firmware, you name it, in my environment, and I could go and query all of my SBOMs for which Log4j was there, and which versions, knowing which devices that I needed to address and or reach my manufacturers for patches very quickly. This is not, Log4j is just one example that we can tie to that so many folks didn't know that they had it. So I would be in favor of not omitting, but further enhancing with something like Vex and VDR to have some comments back. So and be transparent about your security, because quite honestly, it's gonna maybe force you to do a little bit better on your security, and quite honestly, some of our regulations are requiring it. So, all right, well, that is we are at time. So I want to say thank you very much. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Larry.Pesce at finitestate.io, and or you've got a bunch of other emails that are associated with this webcast. So thank you very much. I bid you adieu, and I hope you have a great rest of your week and a great weekend. Thanks.